Diana here. Welcome to Sew Learn Create. I'm glad you joined us today. And if you like what you see, please be sure you click that subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss any videos that we upload. Also, we have a Patreon page with multiple tiers where you can support us. And I also have in my Etsy shop sewing kits for a lot of the tutorials on the channel. So today's project is the last installment in part 3 of our upcycled shirt, where we're going to be talking about, we've already designed it, picked our supplies, and today we're going to iron everything on and stitch it all together. So let's get started. For today's project, the upcycled shirt, we're in part 3, and we're going to start stitching our shirt, laying it all out, ironing it together, and stitching it. If you need to see parts 1 and 2, I'll link them in the description. So the first thing you're going to remember is when we designed it, we took a picture or a photograph of our design, and then we cut out all our little squares and everything. So the first thing you have to do is you have to adhere to the back of your fabric some kind of fusible webbing, and I'm using Wonder Under today. Another brand you can use is Heat and Bond Light, and it comes with instructions that tells you how to actually fuse it to your fabrics. So the big piece on our design is this, and I've already put the fusible adhesive on the back, and you fuse it with, there's a paper side and a fusible side, which is rough, so you want to make sure that you always adhere it to the back of your fabric. Then what I've done is I've taken my fusible web, and it is kind of expensive, so I try to conserve it, and I've drawn out all my different sizes that I'm going to use on the paper side of my fusible. And then what I'll do is I'll cut this out, and then I'll iron it to the back of the fabrics. And I'll use my photographs on my phone. I can blow it up, and I can see that my yellow is a 2.5 by 3. And I've written on here my measurements. You could also write which fabrics that was if you wanted to. And then what I've done with my fabrics is, because I had bigger pieces, I've just cut down a swatch of fabric that's a little bit bigger than what I need. And that just makes it easier to iron all your pieces together. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to cut out this 2.5 inch by 3 piece. So I'm just going to cut on my line here. And you could cut them all out together and then fuse them on. Whatever works best for you. I will tell you that the Wonder Under has a tendency, when it gets to the edge or smaller pieces, has a tendency to separate from the paper backing. So you have to be a little more careful with it than you do the Heat and Bond Light. So I know that this 2.5 by 3 inch is yellow fabric. So I'm going to take my yellow fabric, and I'm going to line it up on the back side of my fabric. And I'm going to, since it's separated, I'm going to lay that fusible, but I want to make sure that that paper is on top of it, because I don't want to iron directly on that fusible, because it'll stick to my iron and not my fabric. So you have to have that paper. And then I'm going to take my iron, and I'm just going to lay it down, not really move it around, just lay it down and adhere it. And you can see that it's sticking to my fabric. And then I always, once I adhere most of it, but not all the way to the edge, I take and trim it down, because I don't want that fusible sticking to my iron. Now I have it fused mostly to my fabric, and I'm going to just lay my iron down and hold it. And I'm going to just go all the way across, and then I like to flip it over and do it from the front side too. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere all my pieces to my fabrics, and then I'll meet you back and we'll start ironing it to the shirt. Now I've gone and I've fused all my fusible web to my fabrics, and I've trimmed them all down. And one tip I was going to give you when using fusible webbing, you do not want to get it on your iron, because it's really a pain to clean off. So a good thing I use is I take, when I do a big piece of fusible webbing, once I peeled it all off, I save that paper. You can also use parchment paper for this if that's what you have in your house. But when I put my webbing down, I like to just kind of take it and stick it in the middle so it doesn't shift on me. Then I take my parchment paper and I lay it over the top. And then I can run that iron, and it's not close to that webbing. It's still fusing, but it's not getting on my ironing surface. So that's just a kind of a bonus tip for keeping your iron clean. And then when I trim it, I just go and trim right up next to that webbing. And now all my pieces are done. And I did go back and write on there where my pieces were, like these are all for the back and these are for the front. So then, referring back to my photo, I'm going to get my shirt and we're going to start kind of laying it out. And on this shirt, I just want to remember, because I do have these gathers here right at the base of the yoke part of the shirt, I want to make sure that when I put this in place for my big back piece, that I'm kind of away from that gathering, so that when I stitch it, it will help ease it a little better. So I'm going to get my photograph here, and I kind of turned mine this direction. So I'm going to go ahead and peel this fusible webbing, the paper back part, off. And you just kind of find a corner, and you can kind of feel it when it starts to release, making sure that your webbing stuck good. And you can kind of feel your paper is smooth, and then there's you can feel the webbing on the back of your big piece. I'm going to peel it all the way off here. And now I can feel that webbing. And this is one of those papers that I will keep and use it when I fuse something else. So I'm going to lay this down, kind of find the center of my collar, center back a little bit. And when you skew things one way or the other, it helps that if it's a little off-centered, it's no big deal. But you want your shirt laying flat as possible when you kind of lay it out. So I put that kind of right up here. So I'm around those gathers. And then I'm going to pin that in place, because I'm going to have to go to a larger ironing surface to fuse this, because this board is not big enough. So I'm going to have to go to my big ironing surface. So I'm just going to pin this. So I know so I put a pin here, and then I put one way down there. So that's that. And then I have my two pieces here. So then I know that up in this corner, I'm going to trim these threads because they will get in my way when I'm fusing. In this corner, I have my bigger piece of focal fabric. Sometimes it takes a little bit to find a corner. If you kind of bend it back, then it peels off easier. And like this one is not stuck as well, so I can always take it back and iron it again. Just putting my parchment down, kind of going back over it, and usually that will take care of it. My webbing is kind of old, and so it's not sticking as well. But as long as I have enough stuck to my fabric to just kind of hold this in place, which is what it's doing, I'm just going to kind of peel that paper off. And sometimes it'll tear on you, and that's no big deal. You just want to make sure you get all the paper off. So then I know that this piece kind of goes up here, and it's a square, so I can kind of play with the placement of the actual design of the fabric. And I don't want it to cover up this 25-cent bargain. So again, because I'm going to have to move this and go to a different surface, I'm going to pin that in place. And then my next one on that area right here is, I know I have my 1.5-inch square right up here. And I can kind of play with how it all lines out. And I like to, when I put two pieces on top, I don't want an area right here, because then I'm going to have to to secure it all, I would need to stitch that little bit of cream, the focal fabric, and this one. So any tiny little gaps like that, I just kind of try to cover up in my design so that I've got more of a straight line of stitching. So it's just something to think about when you're laying out your design. Again, I'm going to pin it in place. Then I'm going to move down here to the bottom edge where we have our yellow. And my yellow, and you'll refer to your photos quite a bit when you're laying stuff out. My yellow kind of goes like this, and then my crochet heart, if you remember in the design, is on top of this yellow. And that's going to add our texture and dimension. Got my corner. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. If I move it all the way out here, then I've kind of got an awkward edge. So I just kind of try to move it up so that when I stitch, I can go around this way. And it gives me a straighter line of stitching for my larger piece. And again, I'm just going to put a pin in that and pin it in place. Now we're going to go and fuse all these on a larger surface. And we're not putting our doily on yet because we're going to stitch this and add our doily as part of our last step. So I'm going to go to a larger ironing surface, iron these in place, and come back. Now I've gotten the back, all the pieces ironed on, and they're adhered to the shirt. So now we're going to move to the front of the shirt. And if you remember in our design, we had lined it up on this side, and we were going to remove this pocket so that everything would be flat. When I was removing the pocket, I like to take my seam ripper and go from the pocket side underneath these stitches and pick them out. The problem is that this particular shirt was reinforced right here at the top corners. So when I was doing that, 2 small holes, as you can see, got pulled, the threads are pulled loose. So I've reinforced this one with a patch on the inside, and then when we stitch our other stuff on the top, it will stitch this patch down. This will be underneath the lace. This one over here was outside of our design area, so I had to go back to my squares and shapes and cut some additional fabrics. And when you remove a pocket, once you get past the reinforced corners, once you get it, you can tape your seam ripper and do it from the inside. You just want to make sure that you're getting your thread that stitches the pocket on, not the layers of your shirt. And this shirt is kind of a loose weave, so it's real easy to get the threads of the shirt, not just the threads that stitch the pocket on. And I like to keep my pockets because I do use those for other projects. So now we've got to do a little bit of redesigning. I'm going to get this laid out. But you are working with a thrifted shirt to begin with, so your original shirt may have holes that you are wanting to cover. And this is a great way to make that shirt usable, wearable again, because you're just adding some patchwork to it. So our original design was we had our focal fabrics. We had it here. We had the green on top. And we had these 3 lined up the edge. And then I had my yellow square here at the bottom. And then we're going to add this lace edging here. So see, the lace will catch this hole right here and cover it up. And then when we stitch our lace down, it'll stitch that patch. So I'm going to still do this. So I'm going to go ahead and peel my paper off. And I'm going to keep checking with my lace to make sure that that's kind of where I want it in relation to the button edge. So that's kind of how I want that. And in part of my design, I'm deciding which of these will be on the top. So like the green is underneath, the yellow's on top of the focal fabric. And then I cut some other pieces in other fabrics to kind of fix our issue here. So what I want to make sure is that this hole right here gets covered up by this red fabric. And I kind of like it when you have kind of a, this is on top, but you got a little bit of that green peeking above. So I'm going to do that. Then I did a blue, and the blue I kind of want in the background. So I kind of want it behind the focal fabric because I kind of want the focal fabric to stick out a little bit. And then I cut another green square for down here at the bottom. And if you have trouble getting your corners to start, you can take a pen and kind of score that paper and kind of do it from the middle. Sometimes then it comes off in little pieces, but that is another way to get that paper backing off. And then I want this square to be here. So really what I've done is I've just broadened the width of my design by adding some more pieces. And then if I put my lace edge up here, because I still like that, then that kind of gets those pieces where I want them. So that when I put my lace, it'll cover up that edge, and it'll cover up this little mistake here, and it'll still be far enough away from here. I kind of like that design. So once I've kind of got that in place the way I like it, then I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to kind of put it in the middle so it kind of tacks down all of those fabrics. Then I'm going to come back with my parchment paper or my release paper, and I'm going to hold my iron in place and adhere those to the shirt really well. Put that back so I can kind of see. And I'm just kind of holding it in place, not rubbing it around a lot. And then I'll come back and iron it. And if you noticed, I moved my lace because I'm gonna stitch all this and then come back and do my lace. And I don't want to iron this lace because it is polyester and it will melt. So then I'm just gonna kind of go over the top, make sure everything is in place. So now we've taken care of our two areas where we made a mistake or an issue. And we're ready to go, and this will be covered up with the lace. We're ready to go to the machine and start stitching. So now we're ready to begin stitching, and I'm going to start with this big piece on the back of my shirt. And what I want to do is I want the stitching to match pretty close to the background of this. So I have changed my thread to a beige thread to kind of match that. And then in my bobbin is on the inside of my shirt. So I'm just going to make that a white because that will blend well with my white shirt. So then we need to set up our machine for a decorative stitch. And on my machine, I have several decorative stitches, and the one I like to use is what I call chicken feet. It's kind of different, but you could also use just a regular zigzag or even a straight stitch. It's really up to you, but I'm going to set my machine for this stitch here. And my machine is a manual, so the first thing, anything that's in orange, I have to use the SS or second set of stitches on the dial. So I'm going to change that first. That gives me, now I know that I'm on my orange dots instead of my blue, and then that is L. So then I'm going to just turn my handle, and I do it kind of slow. I don't just ratchet it all the way around. I kind of click each one, and now I know that I'm on my L and that I have my orange setting here. And then the other thing I'm going to change is the width that I want that stitch. And I like to do mine pretty wide when I'm doing upcycled shirts to make sure that it catches the edges. Anytime I change to a decorative stitch on my machine, I like to get a couple of pieces of scrap and making sure that I have the right presser foot for that stitch. That's another thing you need to double check. I like to do just a a sample to make sure that stitch is going to be stitching the way I want it to. And this allows me to double check and make sure I don't need to change anything else. So that looks pretty good, and I check my bobbin. Yeah, it looks okay. So then I can begin stitching my shirt. And I'm starting with this bigger piece on my back, and I like to start here at an edge, and I kind of line it up where I can go the longest distance before I have to take it out of the machine. So I'm going to start right here at the corner with my needle down, and I'm just going to go around the beige part. And when I'm stitching a decorative stitch, you want to make sure my foot has a plastic raised area that is the center of that foot, and that's where I'm lining up as close as possible the edge of the fabric. That keeps my stitching right on the edge of this piece. Then when I get to the corner, just going to make sure my needle is down, just like we do in a lot of other projects. Then I'm going to raise my presser foot. I'm going to rotate my project and make sure that everything is lined up and nice and flat before I begin stitching again. Then when I get down here to my yellow, I want to go right to the edge of the yellow and stop, take my shirt out, and then I'm going to pick back up here on the other corner because I'm going to come back and do yellow stitching around my yellow fabric. So I'm going to pull it out. Then I'm going to turn my shirt a little bit, put it back in. And now I'm going to go from this edge all the way around to my top fabrics. Again, when I get to that corner, making sure my needle is down, rotate my project, and keep going. And again, I'm stopping right here at the edge of my red because I don't want to do white or cream stitching on that red. So I'm going to pull it out. Then the next part is anytime you have layered pieces, you want to do the bottom layer first. So I would want to do the focal fabric stitching first then come back and do my top red piece. And the reason for that is because if you have any where they kind of touch or get close, you want your top layer to still be on the top, even your thread on the top. So I'm going to change to my blue thread, stitch this off camera, and then I'll come back and show you how to do that top red one. Now I've finished my blue, which is my bottom fabric. It's underneath my red, and I'm ready to do the top one. Now since it's a square that goes all the way around and it's on the top layer, I don't really want to start in a corner and finish in a corner because then it kind of looks ugly. So I'm going to start here at the bottom edge and then go all the way around and come back to that, and then it's a little less noticeable where your stitching starts and stops. And I did change to a red thread, so you won't really see it. And every time I get to that corner, making sure I leave that needle down before I turn. My last corner, push all that through, get it all turned nice and straight, and then I'm going to go just past that original stitching just slightly to kind of lock it all in place and finish the edge. So now you can see that I've gotten my cream stitch down, my blue, which is underneath the red, and the red stitching. I'm going to finish the bottom yellow and all the front pieces, and then I'll come back and show you how to add the last embellishments on your shirt. Now we've gotten all our stitching done, and as you can see, I did each color of fabric. I did that thread color, so I've used all my different colors here, and then on the back, all of this is finished stitching also. One thing I wanted to give you a tip about is, depending on your machine, and every machine is a little different, my thread, when I do a decorative stitch, sometimes does not tie off well, or not the stitching. So I like to make sure that it's gonna not come loose when I wash this, because it's a shirt, it will get washed a lot. So I flip it to the inside. I take a pin, and if you just kind of pull on your bobbin thread a little bit, it'll create a loop for your top thread to pull it to the back. I pull it to the back, and then I just do a double knot, tie it off, and then clip those threads. And that way I make sure that all my stitching lines are nice and secure, so that when I wash this, it won't pull that stitching out. All right, so now we're ready to do the last finishing touches on our shirt. And we need to add our heart to this yellow piece. And then we're going to put a button in the center, but we're going to stitch the heart on by machine. You could do it by hand if you wanted to, but I'm going to show you today how to do it by machine. And sometimes on crocheted items, you have to find the correct side. And this looks like it's the correct side. And then I want to make sure if I want to do that heart straight in line with the bigger piece, or if I want to turn it on an angle. And I kind of like it straight and kind of lined up with that larger piece on my back. And I'm going to pin that in place, making sure that I only get the back layer of my shirt. And then when we go to the machine, I'm going to start probably right over here, and I'm just going to stitch around the outside edge. Our button will kind of hold the center in place when we stitch that, but you want to make sure that your edges are stitched down, because when you wash it, if they're not stitched down well, then it'll begin to curl on you, and you'd always have to iron it. And I don't like to iron clothing. So Then on the front, I'm going to go ahead and get this in place also. We're going to add our lace to this outside edge here. And again, lace is the same way. You need to figure out which is the right side or the wrong side. And I want it lined up with the edge of my fabrics and my scallops out here. Now on my lace, I am going to turn it under so I have a finished edge here, and I'm going to pin that in place. Then I'm going to pin it down the side edge. And then when I get down here to the bottom, I just want to give myself a little bit of extra lace in case when I'm stitching this, because I'm going to stitch it down this edge first. When I stitch it, then if I need to adjust it for stretch or something at the end, then I've got that little bit of ease. So I'm going to give myself plenty of room to tuck under. I can always come back and cut that off at the end. So I'm going to give myself a good amount there at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and tuck it and pin it, but just in case something shifts on me, I've got a little bit of room to make an adjustment if I need to. So when we go to the machine, we're going to stitch our lace and we're going to stitch our heart on the back. So let's go to the machine. Now we're going to stitch this crocheted heart in place. So I've reset my machine for a straight stitch. You could use a zigzag if you wanted to, but I find a straight stitch works just as well and is a little easier for me to follow. And I want to start on the side of my heart, not at a point. So I'm starting here with my needle down, and we're just going to stitch around the outside edge. And then when I get to that bottom, I'm going to lift and turn, making sure my needle is down, lining myself up. And again, I'm using the center of that line in the center of my foot and kind of keeping it close to that edge. And I'm going to go ahead and remove that pin so it doesn't get in my way. Then when I get to the curve, I'm just going to stitch a little, adjust, then stitch a little more and go around the curve. And I want to go all the way to the point and then turn to do the other side of the heart. Then when I get back to this stitching, I'm going to cross it and back stitch a little bit to lock it in place. And now our heart's sewn on, and we'll flip and do the front. And for the lace, I want to stitch down this edge first, so because it'll secure it kind of to my fabric edge here. So I'm going to start here at the top. Actually, I'm going to start here and go across, then down and go up, and then we'll do the scallops. And I am going to start right on that edge or pretty close to it. And this is one of those times where it's really important to start with your needle down in your fabric. I'm going to turn, and then I just want to stitch kind of straight down this edge here as best I can so that my stitches don't show. I'll pull that pin out, and then this is where if I need to make an adjustment of turning this under to make sure it lines up with the edge of that fabric as close as possible, then that's when I would need to make that adjustment. I'm going to go to the corner and I'm going to turn and sew across the bottom edge. Then when I get to my scallops, I like to stitch my scallops down, because if you leave this lace loose, which you could, then when you wash it, it could curl on you and you'd have to lightly iron it to get it to stay. So kind of get your bulk situated. Then we're just going to kind of follow this scallop edge as best we can. All right, got a jam in my bobbin, so I'm going to pull it out. So now I've fixed my bobbin, and I'm just going to back up just a little bit and continue on. And then when I get to this corner where my other stitching started, I'm going to stitch close to that edge and then back stitch a little bit, just to kind of lock those in place. Now we've got our heart and our lace attached. We'll go back to the mat and add our last few embellishments. Our last embellishment on the front is our yo-yo and button here on the corner of the collar. And I like to sew my my yo-yos on by hand, because I want it to be secure and not, again, in the wash. If I don't secure these edges, they'll tend to curl up on me. So I'm going to I've got red thread, and I'm going to just put my knot underneath, and then I'm just going to do a quick invisible stitch where I'm catching just the edge of my yo-yo going in, and I'm not going all the way through my collar. I'm just going in that top layer, so you won't see this thread at all. And I'm just catching that edge. So I'm taking a little tiny stitch here, going through that one layer and coming up just a little further down. Then when I get back to where I started, I'm going to take a stitch, and I'm going to kind of make my knot, rather than going all the way through, I'm going to make my knot right here at the edge. I'm going to make my loop, make one dot, and then do a double knot. And with the folds of that yo-yo, you won't even see that knot. And clip my thread. Then for my button, I'm going to use the red thread to sew my button on, because I want the red to show in the center of that blue. So again, I'm going to take and bury my knot in my yo-yo. And then with my button, I am going to go all the way through to the back side. So that's the only red stitching you'll see underneath my collar. And you just sew a button on just like you normally would, right in the center of that yo-yo. So again, the only red stitching you see is this tiny bit right here underneath. And then this time I am going to put my knot underneath the collar. I'm going to take a stitch, make my loop, put it through, and then do that one more time. Then our yo-yo and button are secure. Then to put my button on the back here, again, I've got my green button that I'm going to sew right here in the center, and I'm going to put it and use yellow thread so that I have that yellow on that button showing through. And that's one more area of design. If you didn't want the yellow on the button, then you could do a solid green thread and your button would diminish a little more in your design. And this is one that does have 4 holes, so you can either do up and down or you can do an X, and I'm going to do the X. And I'm going all the way through my yellow fabric, my doily, and my shirt. So I'm going all the way through to the back of my shirt. Then again, when my button is sewn on, I'm going to flip it over and tie my knot back here at the back. And now our shirt is complete. I'm going to clip all the threads. We'll do some pictures at the end of up close of the whole project. And then remember, this shirt will be available in my Etsy shop if you would like to purchase it. So, see you in the next one. Liked today's project, the 3-part series of making an upcycled shirt. This is our finished shirt. We'll have pictures for close-ups at the end. And remember, this shirt and others are available in my Etsy shop if you'd like to purchase one. And I hope you enjoyed this project and will make your upcycled shirt too. So, see you in the next one.